welcome to Bronx Talk. Over the all-time hottest summer that just ended, Transportation Alternatives collaborated with the NASA Develop Environmental Justice Team to analyze summer temperatures at New York City bus stops. Maybe predictably, they found that the hottest bus stops are 14.5% hotter than the coolest, and those are more likely to be located in Black, Latino, Asian, and high-poverty community in Queens, and of course, our home borough of the Bronx. The study included some fascinating data that has been overlooked, as well as solutions that we'll discuss tonight. Also, what's up with congestion pricing at this point? We'll talk about that and some bicycle issues too. Please join me in welcoming Transportation Alternatives Bronx Uptown organizer, Jada Yeboa. Nice to see you, Jada.
Nice. Thanks for having me.
We're thrilled to have you. And the co-chair of the Bronx and Upper Manhattan Committee for Transportation Alternatives, it is Cecil Brooks, Jr. Nice to have you with us, sir.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
Jada, let's just start with you. I was, as you know, I was fascinated by this this hot bus stop study.
It's the hot topic.
Hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers rely on the nation's slowest buses for transportation, and the vast majority of them wait for the bus at unsheltered, unshaded bus stops. Did somebody notice this? Did you say, hey, I've been waiting for the bus so long, it's super hot? What gave TA the idea that maybe we ought to study this?
Well, I cannot take all the credit. I think we go out there a lot. So a part of the organizing is, again, from my lens, is kind of like a bottom-up approach. So we went out there and we saw folks out there and we're like, that's crazy. Like I'm on the streets a lot with like a lot of my campaign work. And so during the summer, I would petition with like folks and I was feeling the heat, you know what I mean? Like I had to carry water bottles and whatnot. And so this was a conversation that, was something that was bubbling under a lot of the other things, and
bubbling is a fun word to use in this context.
It's going to be a lot of heat puns. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. That was good. That was a good one. That was a good start.
Yeah, but I think it's just like these are issues that aren't something it's not hidden. It's very hyper present, and it's really about if you want to look. And so that's really what we decided. We decided to look.
You know, I realized, and forgive me because I'm not a scientist but did you go out with like a thermometer and say, well, this bus stop is hot and this one is not? And then, of course, the NASA Develop Environmental Justice Team was part of it. Just talk about the process that got you to figure these things out.
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, I'm also not a science person. So NASA, the specifics are them.
Well, you brought in NASA, who's a bigger science than them.
Exactly. But yeah, in terms of, again, from like my perspective, the organizing, that's exactly what we did. We went out into the streets and we checked the heat. We checked the heat of the Bronx, and we found the Bronx BX1, District 1, is the hottest in...
Really?
Yeah.
Is that because it goes down the Grand Concourse and there's... Again, unshaded, unsheltered.
Exactly.
You know, that brings up an interesting thought, and I've never thought about this, having lived in the Bronx my whole life. I've seen shelters. How did they decide which ones get those, those shelters or don't get the shelters?
And so it's really a thing of planning, and a lot of times it's a random thing. Like the community has to ask for it a lot of times for shelter, and if they don't push for it, they're not going to usually get it. And when we look at spaces like the Bronx and like Black and Brown communities, we're going to see that there isn't as much of a focus in planning or in kind of like community outreach and community engagement when we're looking at planning. And so when these kinds of projects are being implemented in the Bronx, there's so many different missed spots that they're not going to be able to kind of
this makes me just take a deep breath, because we hear this so much about being underserved and which neighborhoods get served and which don't. We have some numbers. Let's put up. We got a full page here with some information. So, and this is right out of the TA and NASA information. New York City's 7 hottest bus stops are in the Bronx. The average is 11 degrees Fahrenheit above the citywide average, 20 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the coolest bus stops. And the Bronx is home to 12% of the city's bus stops, but 27% of those are the city's hottest.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what do we do next, because we know that climate change is here. We had a terribly hot summer.
Exactly.
I introduced the show by saying it's the all-time hottest summer that we've ever had. Now that we know this is the case, what happens?
What happens?
Other than the rest of us are taking our jackets off and rolling our sleeves up and and trying to deal with it.
And we cannot buy enough little portable fans for everyone, so we have to actually do stuff. So yeah, I think that something I thought about when we went out there and we tested the bus heat was 135 degrees Fahrenheit.
Excuse me?
It was the bus.
Say that,
135 degrees Fahrenheit.
At a bus stop?
Right off of Allerton. 130.
Allerton, do you know what stop it was?
Oh my goodness, I'm forgetting.
That's okay.
But yeah.
So it's
135 degrees Fahrenheit. And
there were people just sitting there waiting for the bus,
Yeah.
just another day saying, wow, how hot it
Yeah,
is.
we did a lot of outreach and stuff like that. And the funniest way we were doing outreach was giving out bottles of water to folks.
That's the best you could do.
Exactly.
Cecil, just to bring you into this conversation about this, just talk about transportation alternatives and this study and other studies. Why is this at the core of what you folks are trying to do?
Yes. Thanks again for having us. So transportation alternatives, it's really at the intersection of climate justice as well as urban stewardship, planning, land use. And the initial mission was to reclaim the street from the automobile. And that has evolved over the years to the point where we're really looking to make New York City as accessible as possible for everyone who uses the street, whether those are car drivers, cyclists, pedestrians, seniors, disabled folks. And we're really looking to make sure that each borough, each part of New York City gets their fair share in resources and attention.
Yeah, these kinds of things really are very complicated. Now, I have been a bike rider, haven't done it lately. I drive a lot. Because then once you put in bike lanes, you want to make sure the bike lanes are used because you're squeezing the automobiles. We're going to talk about congestion pricing, congestion, right? Operative word there. You're squeezing the cars, you're creating more lanes. Of course, there's a whole engineering thing that has to go. How close are we to getting where you want us to be, like where TA, or is it just, we're going to be doing this forever? I mean,
yeah, well, when we figure out the bottleneck, that Manhattan and the outer boroughs both suffer from, the city was originally designed for horse carriages and a lot of walking.
Oh, that's right.
Exactly. We're not talking about the congestion pricing of horse carriages. That's a real conversation.
Yeah, and in some ways.
It's an old conversation.
Yeah. And until we figure out how to move the maximum or the ideal amount of people in each part of the city, we're going to have some hard questions and hard decisions to make.
Yeah.
In some ways, I love driving as well. I drove to Detroit 12 hours, a couple months ago. And you don't do that if you hate cars, but some cities are made for it in ways that other cities are not. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that public transit has the resources and the investments that they deserve.
And that's why we're in the second part of our discussion, we're going to talk about congestion pricing and what that meant. I think a friend of mine went to Copenhagen and said, you know what?
Yeah.
He said you wouldn't believe how many people, and it's part of the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Here, we've got an infrastructure, and now we're trying to alter the infrastructure. So, I've got a list. I made a list of all the suggestions. Bus shelters
part.
with seating and countdown clocks.
Yes.
This is, you want to just talk about that a little bit?
I mean, yeah, I think, I don't want to say it's very self-explanatory, but again.
Because the wait time here, is
quite
30 minutes in some cases.
The wait time and
That's insane.
Yeah,
Right.
and even when you do check, because I know, with the bus stops, they have, their little informational kind of bulletin of checking in.
You can do a QR code.
Yes, and you can also text them and whatnot. And even with that, it's super inaccurate. If you use the transit app, it's super inaccurate. If you use Google Maps, it's super inaccurate. And so even times when these times are never ever accurate. And so I think that this is a conversation where we need to be making sure that folks know how long it's going to be for them to be out there, specifically again with this heat, with the heat like rising and whatnot. And like when we think about this, we have to think of the intersections of folks that live here. There's disabled folks, there's older folks. Like my grandmother is like 80. She has like a new knee. She cannot be outside in the heat for more than like 20 minutes. And so we have to think of these folks. And so these kind of solutions help in the sense of like easing the transit and the wait in transit for folks to get from place to place.
You know, when you were saying they're not accurate, I remember not too long ago, I did one of the QR. I was like, okay, when is this bus coming? And I did one of the QR codes, and it said like 4 minutes or something. 4 minutes, turned into 18, and I'm like, all right, so that doesn't work.
Yeah.
I actually, Gary, I was in Staten Island spending the day there a couple weeks ago.
Goodness, we're Bronx people. What are you doing out there? Okay, go ahead. You were in Staten Island.
Seeing the rest of the world, and I honestly looked to use public transit as well. I love exploring other parts of New York, and so I used the QR code. The bus was supposed to come in 5 minutes. That turned into 15 minutes. And then I used the MTA mobile app on my phone, and that turned into an extra 10 minutes. I even looked online and with Google Maps, and I got 2 other times. So something is off on how we invest in public transit.
Well, yes, and again, we're going to get to congestion pricing, but I want to talk about some of the things that might help. Another thing is trees. Plant trees. It makes sense, of course, everywhere. It's very difficult to plant trees on sidewalks where there's not that opportunity to do that. Do we know where we can plant trees, or is it just a matter of where it's possible? I mean, we all love the idea. Aside from the finances, we'll talk about that. But how do we do it? How do we decide who gets trees and who doesn't?
Who gets trees? Everyone.
Isn't that crazy?
And that's literally when you say it like that.
Question, yeah.
Exactly. When you say it like that, it's who gets trees. And so when we are having these conversations, this big point of that is bioswales. So we think of bioswales as something where
bioswales. What does that mean?
Bioswales. Do you want to give the?
I'll tag out.
Okay, theory. So bioswales are usually.
Jada, you're up. Go to it.
Here I am. Bioswales, and I might not be giving the exact definition, but from my understanding is a space in which we can put in the median where we have planters. So you know how certain medians have. So
even planters or things like that, be creative about it.
Exactly. And so we have to find, because you're right, like there are sidewalks and whatnot, but we have to I think it's how we plan our streets.
Is this an MTA thing, a DOT thing, or something, let's say with city planning or the community board has to figure it out, what to do with some of these bus stops? Yeah.
That's the beauty and the very annoying thing about
so I asked the right question.
It's everyone.
Did you want to respond?
Yeah, I know another related conversation and parallel in some ways, waterfront development, especially since a lot of our bike lanes and greenways are set on the coastline. They are honestly one of the easiest ways to get people out in fresh air, enjoying alternate forms of transportation. But to your point, there is such an alphabet soup of agencies that have some say in the process, whether it's the Department of Parks, DCP, DOT, even SPS.
Clearly, I've been doing this too long because I'm thinking, gee, how are we going to solve this? And then I'm thinking, well, do you call the MTA? It is bus stops. Do you call the DOT because it is streets? Or do you call the community board because it's community infrastructure?
Right.
All of the above. Get them around the table. Bring them into BronxTalk, and we do it.
Exactly.
Last thing I want to do on this is the reformatting of bus stops. You like the idea of the bus stop designs. And we have a photograph that I took off the Transportation Alternatives website. So is this the kind of format we like for bus stops, where they get like kind of an exit lane there? And how does that work? Do you want to just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so again, when you see that there's a cut there, again, for them to have an exit lane, but also for slowing down. So that the cars, again, buses have a space to turn that's not going to be interfering with cars and not going to be forcing them to, again, be cutting off in these spaces as well. And so a little bit further as well, there should be like a curb cut, which is supposed to be accessible for accessibility.
For accessibility.
Exactly.
Right.
And so all of these things, again, are what we kind of consider, traffic mediation or traffic oh my God, there's a term for it, but it's supposed to be traffic slowing and just making
So,
sure.
well, so now here, let's use this as a jump-off point for congestion pricing, because when you do that, and I've seen there are many streets where we've got bus lanes. I know on Pelham Parkway, for example, there's a bus lane, but of course that means closing the instead of 3 lanes, you'll have 2 lanes to drive on. Does it mean backing up traffic to do this? And is that worth it? Are we doing better? Are we going to be able to get people out of their cars and into the buses? I mean, because that would, it's a jigsaw puzzle, I guess. So what are your thoughts about that, Cecil?
Yeah. So there are a lot of studies and questions around how do you reduce traffic in cities in general. And one of the things that's interesting across the United States, such as Detroit, again, where I had my last road trip, even when you have 4 lanes of traffic or 5 or so throughout a city, that doesn't necessarily do the most to reduce traffic if the roads are saturated with car drivers, especially on the same schedule. And in Detroit, for example, Motor City, Motown, you have the ability to go and drive anywhere in 20 minutes. That doesn't sound like the worst, but you have the ability, again, regardless of distance. So even if something is a mile or a mile and a half from your destination or from where you're starting from, it's going to take about the same amount of time as to drive 3 times the distance.
Right.
And that, doesn't really make driving a car that optimal in that case.
In those cases, I want to put up, we have a statement that you folks said about congestion pricing that I pulled right off the website.
Yep.
We state unequivocally that delaying congestion pricing, as had happened, this statement was made just before it, will endanger the city's future, the region's future, and indeed the future of the state of New York. You must turn on the program on June 30th, as is the law, which of course the governor decided not to do that. How devastating was that for this process of easing traffic and of course providing funding for alternatives, transportation alternatives?
Yeah.
This was a really big thing.
Yeah,
It was.
and it was really
Cecil, go ahead.
huge. It was huge for people, especially uptown, who were really excited for transit improvements. And a lot of us are very familiar with equity and disparities in the Bronx, but right across the river in Harlem, where transportation alternatives is very active, in East Harlem in particular, and Yorkville, we have a whole set of folks who have been waiting for subway service and alternatives to finding an expensive parking lot. Those
Second Avenue subway.
Yep. And that has been put on hold because the MTA has built into their budget these changes.
There are many issues in there, but among them is the price. There were many people who maybe have to drive, or let's say they go to the hospital, they go to some of the hospitals downtown on 34th Street, and the only, if they're infirm, they need to drive, and they're like, well, wait a minute, $15. That's a lot worse than the $1.45 I do on the subway. Is there some sympathy for drivers who said, you know what, we can't pay that. Thank you, Governor Hochul, for stopping it?
Of course. And that's where 2 things come in. The exemptions, right, for working class drivers who have no other option, and also the question of where my money is going if I have to pay this.
Exactly.
That's the biggest question I hear.
The last thing I just read, which was literally before we came on the air a day or 2 ago, was that the governor is proposing to, if you lower, or I don't mean you, if the cost is lowered as opposed to $15, I mean, I don't know what numbers they're looking at, make it 10 or 8 or whatever, then she might want to approve it. But the word is to reconfigure this and get it going is. It's not like, well, okay, now we'll do it, and then October 1st they'll make it happen. Right. What are your thoughts about that as one of the ways to get agreement on moving this forward?
Well, since we do a lot of organizing, with Transalt, the biggest thing we would hope for upon learning the specifics would be to have enough community buy-in, community engagement, and having those stop gaps so that people can check in the outer boroughs.
When you say community engagement in making that decision?
Yes.
I see. And so you think, and forgive me, I don't recall exactly what it was like. It was not the kind of community engagement we had, for example, with the Metro North stops that we have in the East Bronx, which was extensive community engagement.
Exactly.
Was the lead up to congestion pricing including a community? Was there significant community engagement? Are we aware of it? I don't recall
Not
seeing
enough.
that.
No.
Not enough.
From our end, we did, and I think that's like a big pushback as well, or something that we. It hurt a lot when we got this news, because like a lot of the outreach has been from partner orgs and folks who are not from like the MTA, not from the DOT, but community folks who have been trying to like
Either
garner this.
they're going to use their bicycles, they want the alternatives, they want mass transit improvements, or there are drivers who may have strong opinions about it as well. You think there has not been enough public engagement about it? Well, we just started the dialogue right here. That's what we exist for. Before we run out of time, I want to ask about city bikes. And you said you rode one even today. So obviously the agenda for transportation alternatives is more bicycles, make bicycles accessible, and certainly make the opportunity to use them on roads more accessible. But a lot of these city bike racks are in places, I got a couple in my neighborhood that are filled with bicycles. They take up 3 parking spaces, which only makes people angrier, and yet they're not, they're not being used. Is this, I don't know who to ask for this, both of you can weigh in. Is the sighting of city bikes a problem? Like, I'll give you an example. Our studios are at Lehman College, and they've put, because we have wide sidewalks, they put the city bike on the sidewalk, doesn't interfere with anything, really. And so what are your thoughts about that, that it's kind of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other? We like the idea, but we're taking away cars, parking spaces, and that's just making the situation on the roads worse.
So yeah, I think that like there's a few points to that. I agree. I think that like when we're planning where to put city bikes, those are really important. Like TA, shout out to Sean Garcia, the former Bronx Uptown organizer, was very instrumental in expanding the city bike program into the Bronx. And so again, we have to think about, you're right, we have to think about planning. Where do we put these? Because I have a friend who lives in the Bronx, and their city bike dock there's one on top of a hill and there's one at the very bottom of the hill. So the ones at the very bottom of the hill are always full, but the ones at the top are not, because nobody is willing to bring them back.
The bike up.
Exactly.
But so is there oversight? So in other words, does somebody go around and say, well, wait a minute, these are not being used, let's give them back the parking spaces?
And see, I just recently learned something that they don't.
I was going to say, this doesn't sound like good news.
No, they actually don't have any kind of like implementation. What they have is this thing called line bike ferries, or line bike.
I don't know what that means.
So people who just out of the goodness of their hearts will return them. There is no kind of infrastructure for returning them, for returning city bikes or anything like that. It's just folks out of the goodness of their hearts who see the bikes around who are willing to put that back. And that's really the extent.
So wait, I've never ridden one, so I don't really know. So if you take it out and then just leave it somewhere, aren't you charged? Isn't your credit card charged for that or something?
Well, they do have a docking system, so ideally someone would return it to another dock. But they also rely on the Bike Angels program,
the
which
Bike
is
Angels.
a volunteer program. It's kind of a game where members can do that work for
You know, I'm shaking my head because I love our volunteers. I love the people of the Bronx who want to give and want to do.
They shouldn't have to do that.
But that's not a way to put this large infrastructure in place. We're almost out of time. Well, we'll give you each a chance. What would you like to see happen? I mean, congestion pricing, bring it back. You'd like the community engagement. Just give me a couple of bottom lines. What's the word on improving transportation alternatives in the Bronx and the city of New York?
Okay, so I'm going to try and, this is going to be very much like my, my grad thesis. I'm just going to try and make sure I get this right.
Let's go. Professor, could we evaluate this?
So I think, again, when we talk about these issues, when we talk about congestion pricing, when we talk about bus heat, when we talk about biking, all of these things are intrinsically linked. These things are not just for more accessible transportation, but also to make sure that we stay alive. It's getting hotter and hotter and
that.
hotter. Yeah, the little thing of living. It's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And when we're thinking about congestion pricing, a lot of it too, what we tried to push was the money it's going into investing in other modes of transportation. It's investing in more parks and whatnot, investments in parks, which again is 0.01% of like all of our investments, even though the Bronx has like the most amount
So
of parks.
congestion pricing for you is a big thing because of the economies. Now, the governor had said she was going to come up with other money. You know, we should all live to see that. Before we run out of time, go ahead, Cecil. What's your final thoughts on all of this?
Yeah. So I think as someone who was born and raised in the city, someone who has worked in government on policies on the local and federal level, we shouldn't hopefully wait a lifetime, you know, to see
Another lifetime.
another generation,
Right.
you know, to see our boroughs, our homes, honestly, be easy for us to explore. And for us, you know, we have people, you know, young professionals, people who want to raise families here, start families, and it just shouldn't be a concern about whether or not your child will be able to cross the street without any concern, or have an open street without concern
Or
for
you can
someone
simply
driving.
drive up the Deegan to Yonkers and get there without getting stuck in traffic for a half hour.
And those are the people we're fighting for,
That's
right?
exactly
Livable city.
Listen, my bottom line is there's opportunities here, and when you brought up more community engagement, man, this is what I do for a living. We need as much of that as possible. Thank you to Transportation Alternatives. Thank you, Jada Yeboa. We appreciate you. Thank you, Cecil Brooks Jr. We appreciate you, and thanks to TA for having the dialogue, for keeping us moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, Gary.
much. And
Folks,
thanks to
thanks,
Bronx.
everyone.
Thanks to the Bronx. And I thank everybody. We thank our producer, who today is Mariuxi Moran, did a fabulous job today. The director is our buddy Will Guzman. The editor, unseen, is Yessi Diaz. And of course, a cast of thousands who work with us in the studio. And of course, to you too, yes, the people of the Bronx. We want to hear from you. So if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, I'll be back next week.